Well, boils and ghouls, it's your old pal, John Kassir, the voice of the Crypt Keeper. And I want to welcome my good fiends of the Horror Heals podcast. Is horror good for mental wellness? But of course it is. I delight in the delicious deaths of pitiful people on the silver screen. So get ready for a hell of a good time with my new fiends, Corey and Kendall, on the Horror Heals podcast.
Welcome back, Horror Heliacs. Today we've got a killer episode lined up for you. We're diving into the world of horror fiction with an emerging author who has one of the most powerful backstories we've heard in some time. His name is Dacre Black, and his new book, The Campground, is out now as part of his Afterlife series. But before we get into the spooky stuff, let me tell you what makes Dacre's journey so special. Like a lot of us, he dealt with bullying growing up, and instead of letting that break him, he found a way to fight back. Not just through martial arts, although he's a total pro at that too, but by creating his own reality through writing. His mom told him something amazing. If the world isn't treating you right, you can build your own world in stories. And that's exactly what he did. So, from bullying to martial arts to writing his own horror stories, Dacre has taken the tough stuff in life and turned it into something creative and something healing. Horror is more than just scares, right? It helps us face the monsters, both real and imagined. Dacre, welcome to Horror Heals.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. You're actually our first fiction author that we've had on the podcast, so we're thrilled about that. Kendall and I are both avid readers and love the scary, spooky, weird stuff.
Well, that makes me really happy to hear that. I didn't know I was your first fiction author. It puts a lot of pressure on me. I have to set the bar.
Well, all the others have to compare themselves to you now.
Exactly, right? So, first off, I'm noticing behind you a Breakfast Club poster. You know, we're 80s junkies in the house here. And I love that you were setting your series in the 1980s. That's the decade where Kendall and I came up. And if not a day goes by that we don't have some kind of 80s music playing in the house.
Yep.
Yeah. Same here. I was born in 1982. So the 80s hold a very dear place in my heart.
That was a great Steven Spielberg year. Both Poltergeist and E.T. came out in 1982. So you were born in a good year.
I have three favorite, paranormal movies. You know, anything that deals with haunted houses or ghost hunting or whatever you want to call it. And I think Poltergeist is probably my number one favorite within that subgenre.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a good one. Yeah.
We love it.
You get Steven Spielberg and Tobe Hooper together and, there's going to be a masterpiece. So can you talk a little bit about why you set your series in the 1980s?
I've been writing for a long time. I started writing in 1994 and I published a book of short stories, a book of poetry. I published a novel and it was all in general fiction. There was just a very generic genre. I would think that the novel that I wrote was the closest genre that I could say. It was probably Southern fiction, and just nothing was taking off. I would love to be able to do this for a living. I think any author probably would. Whenever I started self-publishing my books, something that I noticed that was selling a lot was not only serialization, where you have many, many sequels, and there's a character that people become comfortable with and want to see succeed, but also subgenres. I know that the 80s are really, really popular just across the board. I've met many people that surprised me that they were really into the 80s. Not to stereotype anyone, but the reason that I chose the 1980s is because it's really nostalgic for me. And I also wanted the main character to have to perform his paranormal investigations from more of an organic standpoint. I didn't want him to be able to use cell phones and the internet and things like that. I really like whenever I see older movies, and there's a rotary phone. Whenever I was researching it, the details that I added in, I had to dig really deep. But for example, something that a lot of people remember from the 80s is when you would go to a restaurant in particular, a pizza joint, like Pizza Hut or something like that, and you would get those paper cups and they would have wax on them. I would like scrape it off with my teeth whenever I was a kid. But it's like little details like that I'll add into the stories to make it more 80s. That's the main reason that I chose the 80s, was because I wanted it to be a little bit older. I really also I like the aesthetic, the neon lights, the neon spandex, the crop tops, the tight acid wash jeans, all that stuff.
Well, kudos for doing the research. I think those details are so important, and they really, kind of pull us in. Like, just as you were describing the wax cup, and like immediately I flash back to being a kid, and for some reason, like that McDonald's Coca-Cola and that wax cup was the best tasting soda, and that you just took me back to like, be at 5 years old.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny that you bring up the lack of technology, because I'm reading a mystery / thriller right now, and I'm not going to name the author because I'm not sure if I like it yet, but it is interesting that I was happy when she made the main character lose her cell phone, because at least some of the action is happening outside of the internet. So it's been much more, I'm much more engaged, I know, than I would be if everybody could click and get their answer in 3 seconds.
Well, let's continue flashing back to the 80s. What was young Dacre's first exposure to anything horror?
I had an aunt that passed away a couple of years ago from kidney failure, and she was basically like my second mother. And I grew up with her son. He's basically like my brother. His name is Brad. And him and his little brother introduced me to the 3 franchises from the 80s, horror franchises from the 80s: Halloween, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street. I would say my earliest memory of watching anything horror was the opening scene of Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives, whenever he takes that rod and shoves it, I think it was Part 6, he shoves it through the tent and rips that woman in half. That was probably my earliest exposure to it. That it wasn't really, I'm not like triggered by it or anything, but, being a kid and seeing gore like that made me feel like I was getting away with something. And I always liked being a sneaky kid. As far as when I started really seeking it out on my own, I would say probably Goosebumps in 1993, which was when they first came out, I believe. The very first Welcome, I have it right behind me, Welcome to Dead House was the very first Goosebumps book by R.L. Stine. And when I read that, it was just over.
Yep. The gateway. That's the gateway. Yeah, for me, it was Scary Stories in the Dark or something, whatever that series is. That might not be the exact name, but yeah, that was my, like, aha, And then, although I was probably reading Stephen King at the same time.
Yeah, and Scooby-Doo, obviously, in the 80s, watching Scooby-Doo, the Beetlejuice cartoon, just anything that was in that realm. I loved Halloween, too, just Halloween time, because not just because of the candy, but because I really liked kind of escaping my own reality, because I was bullied a lot. That's actually why I started writing, was because I was bullied as a kid. I was severely bullied in middle school. And my mother told me that, like, I would get awards and receive accolades in English class for the short stories that I wrote. And my mother told me that I could create my own reality to escape the world that I actually live in and create my own characters and my own heroes. I would say that's why I started writing, scary stories especially, to escape the horrors in real life. So I was really excited whenever you reached out to me, because I have 2 careers. One that I'm working on, that's writing, but my other career is actually martial arts. I've been teaching Gracie Jiu-Jitsu and Judo for, I was under Hoist Gracie. We recently left his network, but I've been doing that since 1997. And I turned it into a career. COVID kind of screwed it over a little bit, but I'm working back up with my students. But those 2 things kind of meshed together, the writing and the self-defense, because I started them at the same time, roughly the same time, give or take a couple of years. I started both of them for the same reason, because I was bullied.
Well, and I think from what I've heard from people that study martial arts and practice, is that it can be very therapeutic on many levels. That kind of makes sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah, and I over time, the reasons that I do it stack up. They don't really go away. But what you said, therapeutic, I do it more so now for other people's health. Like, it's for self-defense, obviously. I mean, that's the backbone of it. But when I started it, it was to protect myself. And then as a teenager, I wasn't really into ball games. Or I was more into like theater and writing. And I really liked the competition aspect of it because it was the closest that I could get to a fight without actually being in a fight. So that way I could go into these competitions and practice. And then whenever I got a little bit older, like I said, I was born in 82, so I'm 42 now. As I got a little bit older, I started teaching more and seeing how that really helped out other kids that were in the same position that I was in, being bullied, building their confidence. And now that I've been in the game for a while, I'm starting to realize how much it can affect a person's health. Not just coming in and like doing push-ups as a warm-up, the way that it bleeds out into other areas of people's lives.
Let me step back for just a moment and say thank you for opening up about being bullied as a kid. And your mom gave you such amazing advice. I love that. Love that. Love that. I was getting chills as you were speaking. They're still lingering. With the martial arts, a couple of questions there. One, how do you address, when you can sense or find out that a kid, one of your students is being bullied? Like, what kind of advice do you give them?
I give them some personal advice just kind of based on the way that they're being bullied. I'll give them examples of what happened to me, but we also have a protocol that we call talk, tell, tackle. It's the 3 T steps. And this is more for little bitty kids. My general advice would be ignore the person, walk away. And if they keep bothering you, then go and tell someone. So this kind of leads to the talk, tell, tackle. First you talk to the bully and you tell them that, you don't talk to them that way, so they shouldn't talk to you that way. And then if it persists, because that's what bullies do, it's not just a one-off, like one-time thing. If it persists, then you go and tell someone like the guidance counselor or a teacher and request to remain anonymous. And then if it persists again, then there are 2 types of tackles. There's the first verbal tackle, and that's when they should ask the bully, do you want to fight me? So it gets a bit aggressive because they won't stop. So something needs to happen. The talking didn't work. The telling didn't work. And if they agree, then comes the physical tackle, which is when their actual martial arts skills, which looks kind of like wrestling, the style that I teach, their martial arts skills would come into play. But if the bully says, no, I don't want to fight you, then say, okay, then leave me alone.
Great. The other question I've got is, have you introduced martial arts into your fiction?
Yeah, actually, in this series, the Afterlife book series, the first one is titled The Gatekeeper. The second one is titled The Neon Mall. And the third one is titled The Campground. And I'm actually publishing it at midnight tonight because with Kindle Direct Publishing through Amazon, it goes through about a 24-hour phase of review. And then it will be uploaded and go what they call live, which means that it's published. And I really liked the idea of putting it out on October 13th because 13 is synonymous with the macabre, which is also the reason that I chose the last name Black. But there's a woman in the campground, Afterlife, the campground, named Artemi Murdoch, and she has a background in judo, and she names her stallion Kano. And Jigoro Kano was the founder of judo. In 1882, he opened the very first judo school in Japan, it was in Edo, which is old Tokyo.
That's awesome. Not sure yet when your episode is going to air, but please send us an image of the cover and we will push it out tomorrow.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Of course. Absolutely. Yeah. We're all about helping each other out here, and if we can get some people to check out your work, then great. Our job is done.
Yeah. That was my promise to myself at this podcast was don't use it to push my books, even though deep down I wanted to.
Oh, no. Come on. Hey.
Self-promotion is fine.
Absolutely. Yeah. Why do you think people go on talk shows?
Yeah.
George Clooney's not going on Jimmy Kimmel just because he wants to see Jimmy Kimmel again,
He says my Leo. Yeah, right here.
Yeah.
Do you guys have a favorite, if you had to pick one or top 3 horror movies or horror books, do you have some that are your go-tos?
You can share our favorite. We have a favorite horror movie.
It's probably, I think you're thinking what I'm thinking, that I'm a sucker. Friday the 13th is my favorite franchise, and the first installment is really, really good. But I know what Corey and I are talking about is The Exorcist. We're both huge fans of The Exorcist.
Yeah. Did you like the Friday the 13th remake with Jared Padalecki?
All of those movies have their pluses and minuses. It's like we don't necessarily go back to that one as frequently, but we're old school. I mean, I bet we watch the original at least 3 or 4 times a year. We'll start them over and we'll do them all in order, So it's definitely got its charms to it. I just hope that they are able to work out these legal issues, because it's been so long since we've had anything, legit, like licensed Friday the 13th. And kudos to the fans out there who are making fan films and fiction and all of that stuff. It's all good, but come on, let's get something official going again. They were going to do, hopefully that show is going to still happen next year. We had Adrienne King on as one of our first guests, and she was supposed to be part of that reboot series, and hopefully she still will be. But yeah, we want to see something official. I mean, like the last thing that I remember, which they got rid of, was the game. I'm not a big gamer at all, but we bought an Xbox because when we found Kendall's family, one of our nephews that was hanging out with us a lot is a huge gamer. So I'm like, okay, I guess I got to get an Xbox so we got something to do with this kid when he comes over. And then I had to get the Friday the 13th game. And so that was something that he and I bonded over, playing that together.
My cousin has that game. I really like it. I'm not a gamer either. I like Nintendo. That's about it. Like old Nintendo games, but that's awesome that you guys had her on. I saw that, but I couldn't find, I'm not very technologically advanced. Like I still use Microsoft Word from 2008 and to write. But yeah, that's awesome that you guys had her on.
What do your kids think about you writing horror?
Well, first of all, I have a boy and a girl. They're twins. They're 7 years old. And I think that it's influenced them. They come home with notes from their teachers about the stories that they've written in class and how good they are. So that makes me really proud. But they're not too fond of the horror aspect of my books. So in my books, you'll see unusual elements that typically are not in horror that I threw in there for my kids, because I wanted to be able to tell them something about my books. So for example, in Afterlife, the Neon Mall, which is the sequel, the main character, Dick Draven, comes across a jar of unicorn tears. And that was obviously for my daughter. And there is a dead cat. It's the ghost of a cat named Ichabod. He drank the unicorn tears. That's how he died. So his spirit kind of floats around like a flying squirrel. And he actually becomes more prominent in future books. He's kind of like the sidekick. But I put that in there for my daughter. So I can talk to them about my books a little bit. But, I mean, there's some really terrible, gory parts that I threw in there for the most hardcore, like, Terrifier Part 3 Rob Zombie style fans, too.
Right, yes. Wow, what a cool dad you are. That's awesome. So are you, we've got a twin niece and nephew, and we took them to their first haunted attraction back when they were like 12. They're 22 now. So have you thought about exploring the whole creepy twin thing in your horror?
I've thought about, I kind of given away a little bit of the storyline here, but there is a supporting character in the first book named Genesis Jackson, and she's a clairvoyant. And in the second book, I'm trying to figure out how to say this without giving away the plot. Her twin sister, who is deceased, her twin sister's spirit, vengeful spirit, is after her in the sequel. And she ends up, in the very first chapter, she ends up going into Haitian voodoo purgatory. And the main character's job is to try to get her out and get her to go to the Wiccan afterlife, because she doesn't belong there. So it's kind of like a rescue story. But all along the way, that twin sister's spirit is after them. And then they finally kind of face off in the third book in the campground. So I definitely explored that. My kids were definitely that's the result of me having twins, I think. I really wanted to explore that. And I think I did a pretty good job at it, but I'm also pretty biased. But I saw an interview. Do you guys know who Rick Rubin is? I saw an interview with him once, he's probably said it many times, but he said, make music for you, not the audience. So whenever I started writing these books, I've been writing all of them for me. And I'm not saying that I'm being rude and ignoring the audience, but I wanted to write what I didn't get out of horror movies. Like if I watched a horror movie and I was like, oh man, I wish they would have done this or that. That stuff is what I put in my books. What I feel like is missing, the good parts that are missing. The reason that I started writing them was because during COVID, the martial arts school was shut down. When I say during COVID, I mean 2020. It was shut down for about 3 or 4 months. And I had always wanted to become a paranormal investigator. So I went to this place called Thomas Francis University. It's a metaphysical college based out of Florida, and it's online. And I went through their certified paranormal investigator program. And while I was doing it, my children were watching. One day I was reading the text and my children were watching Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. And I was looking up at the TV at Rick Moranis. And I had this idea, what if there was a paranormal investigator that was kind of clumsy, like his character. So that's when the idea of the Afterlife book series was born, was in that moment. And then I took it from there and I've been building it out, and now I'm working on the 4th book. And there's going to be 13 total.
Very cool. I'm super intrigued just by the little teasers that you've given us. We're curious. Are you doing audio versions as well?
I toyed with it. Kindle Direct Publishing allows you to do audio books. I toyed with it, and I got one sale in Australia. But that was all that happened in a 3-year period, so I nixed it. I might do it again later if they ever genuinely take off. I feel like it's a pretty good franchise, and I'm doing it with that intention. I want to get merchandise and all kinds of stuff, but I'll do that later on. I want to focus on the writing right now.
Very, very, very cool. The last question that we ask every guest on Horror Heals is, who is your favorite final character in a horror movie?
Oh, gosh.
I know.
I wonder if y'all would ask something like that. And I thought about it, and now I'm drawing a blank. I want to say the main character in my books, but that would be really cheesy and selfish. I did write for me. I would say in a horror movie, probably Laurie Strode. Definitely Laurie Strode. Halloween, man. That's such the first movie. By the way, I'm not sure if other writers do this. I've never really looked into it, but I've been involved in filmmaking for about 2 decades. I've been in many short films, and I've done the 48-hour film festival in my hometown. I played Stevie Ray Vaughan in an extended short film about his recovery from alcoholism. But having said that, all of the books that I write, especially this Afterlife series, come from the point of view of a filmmaker.
I mean, I think that's really important because, I'm sure you would love to see your creation on the screen, right?
Yeah, that's one of the reasons it's so heavy in imagery. But yeah, I write it. I'll think of the angle that the camera would be in, and then I'll build the scene around that. Or whenever I describe a gory sound, I'll listen to Foley art. Foley art, if you guys don't know, Foley art is the people that make, Foley artists are the people that make the sound effects for horror movies, for any movie really. But I'll listen to Foley art, like how do you make the sound of a bone breaking, and it was someone using a dowel rod on a piece of celery on a pillow. So I'll literally describe that in the book for the sound. I take elements like that from filmmaking and weave it into my stories.
Nice. Well, it really sounds like you're doing this stuff the right way, which just gets us really excited. And you've offered us a lot of surprises today. So I hope this being your first podcast experience was a good one,
Definitely.
So you got to promise us then when the book series takes off and all of a sudden you're a New York Times bestselling author, you got to come back on. Don't forget the little guys.
I told myself that, I believe that the people that build you up are the people that you should carry with you.
Yeah, I agree. We've always felt that way for sure.
Like I said, I was really nervous. I've listened to a few podcasts in the past, but this is the first time me doing this, and you guys made me feel really comfortable, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you. We appreciate that. I mean, that is definitely our goal. You were fantastic, by the way.
Because I've been talking about this podcast to people that I know. It would not surprise me, like the concept of this podcast, it wouldn't surprise me if you guys shot off like a rocket and it became huge. Because I think it's
Well, I mean-
it's a really cool concept and something that people like, and I feel like it can, in a way, it can kind of be therapeutic for some people, especially people that have gone through some really serious trauma.
Dacre, this has been awesome. Your story is exactly why we started Horror Heals, to show how horror can help us deal with the real life stuff that haunts us. You've taken those early experiences of being bullied, mixed them with your passion for martial arts, and turned it into a writing career that's just getting started. Your mom's advice to create your own reality is such a perfect example of how horror can be an outlet for healing. And to our listeners, the Campground is out now, and if you haven't picked it up yet, what are you waiting for? Dacre's blending of 80s nostalgia and paranormal mystery is the perfect escape. Plus, supporting an emerging author with such a meaningful backstory, you can't go wrong. Dacre, we are officially Afterlife fans now, and you've got a promise to come back when your next book drops. We're rooting for you. All right, Horror Heliacs, that's it for this episode. But remember, when someone asks, horror is good for mental wellness? You tell them, of course it is. The Horror Heals podcast is produced and presented by How the Cow Ate the Cabbage, LLC.